Take it away.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, welcome to the first meeting of the new year for Task Group 3. The main things on the agenda for me, at least, was one, I wanted to review this PR, and Jordan had put a comment on here as well. So I wanted to go through that. And then I also wanted to talk about how we could potentially get some more community involvement in the CLE as well. And that's kind of the only two things I had on my agenda so far. Anyone else have any specific things?
That's all I wanted to talk about specifically.
Okay, cool. Sweet. So yeah, just to explain this PR again, this was based on a recommendation from Jordan. We're trying to kind of compose three documents. One is the rationale, and then once the rationale document exists, then the technical choices that exist from the rationale, and then finally an example step, which should all follow naturally. And so this PR is the rationale document that I put up. And yeah, maybe I can just go through this. Oh, sorry, I should have shared my screen here. Let me share.
I put the URL in the chat as well if you want to follow along.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Okay. Perfect. Yeah, how do we want to go over this? Could go through it one by one, or if anything kind of stands out to anyone.
Maybe we talk about just as an overview first.
Yeah.
So like, I see 4 sections here.
Yeah.
And thanks for writing this up, by the way. Like my skill set is very much more in editing and very much less initial creation. So I really appreciate that. So we've got number 1 here. It says balancing structure and flexibility. So we want to be able to like standardize, like define the schema of the data, but in a way that allows covering all the use cases we care about. Number 2, integration with existing systems and practices. This is just sort of formalizing the idea that like, if it doesn't work with stuff, nobody's going to use it. So it's got to work with stuff.
Yeah.
And number 3, identifier aliasing. So this is like a specific use case that needs to be taken into account very early in any design process. Otherwise, it will be if you know, it creates a lot more work in the future if we don't take this into account early. So it's good to call it out. And then the fourth one's okay. Go ahead.
Sorry,
please jump
just
in.
on the third. The third is just like a critical part of the CLE that without aliasing, the CLE is like shouldn't exist. It's like very critical part of the CLE, I think. So yeah. And then the fourth.
And then the fourth one says scoping the specifications. So we want to like, it's, whenever you're trying to write anything down for anything, it's really easy to have some sort of feature creep and end up trying to handle more than you need. So we should kind of talk about using shoulds and musts to like be able to limit our initial version, even if we allow a bunch of stuff as potential follow-ons, but just as a way to, allow us to get to a deliverable as the first like edition or whatever. That's how I was like sort of mental model thinking about the headlines of this document, and then there's a bunch of little specifics in there.
Yep, for sure. Yes.
And so, I mean, we can talk about my 2 specific comments, or if, go ahead.
Yeah. Maybe I can just briefly go over kind of the whole document, each of these points. The first one, defining a core set of life cycle events that the CLE will standardize. We've already kind of been over this in the other document. We have kind of a list of life cycle events. Must standardize how these events are represented in a formal schema. And then basically specifying some sort of selection criteria for the events, like which are like, because there's tons of events that we could pick, but we just want to pick the ones that are the most used, most widely used, I guess, for our initial version of the schema. The event should enable component consumers to make informed decisions about risk. I don't even know if this needs to be in here, honestly. It's kind of a filler. The events must be unambiguous and factual in nature. This one, maybe you had a comment about this one, but
Yeah, my comment was about future events. Like, I think that statement
yeah,
applies, like, should hold for any past events.
right.
Because like at that point, it's documenting history, right? It has to be factual in nature. But
Yes.
if there's future events, like it's speculative
Um,
inherently. So maybe just adding past events must be unambiguous would be sufficient.
mhm. Um, how I was trying to describe this is more in like in the case of, let's say, like a speculative event might be like, I think this is end of life because
Mm,
of the things that I've found. Maybe the GitHub wasn't being updated or something like that, and like you create a lifecycle event because you believe it that it's potentially end of life, versus a manufacturer maybe saying, yes, this is end of life in the future at this specified date, that this is our
right.
plan, but it's like, I don't know. It's
Yeah,
yeah.
that's a good thing to guard against because like
Hmm.
there is definitely a lot of folks out there that wrongly believe that a lack of activity indicates that a project is dead. Where when in
Yes.
fact like that's simply not the case. So like, and there's lots of other things like that where people may think it is a rubric to
Yeah.
indicate something, and in fact, it doesn't tell you that what you think it tells you. So I
Yeah.
like that aspect, but if we also
Hmm.
only limit it to things the maintainers say,
Mm.
like so for example, I have many projects
Hmm.
that are done that I haven't touched
Hmm.
in 5 or 6 years, but if a
Yep.
security vulnerability showed up, I would fix them within a day, like
Yes.
no matter how much time had passed.
Yep.
However, if I get hit by a bus, those projects are dead. But the maintainer
Hmm.
would then not be able to factually state that the project is dead. So there's
Yep.
there's got to be some. It would be nice to have some way to navigate that where um, maintainers aren't the gatekeeper of that
Hmm.
status, but
Hmm.
also uh, they can't be like projects also are not prone to being incorrectly labeled because of somebody's uh you know personal heuristic.
Hmm. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I know what you mean. I'm worried about the complexity of allowing. I know Salve has something to say about this. I was going to ask you to comment on this actually. But I'm worried about the can of worms it opens, like the kind of the attribution stuff. I don't have it worked out in my head, basically how that would work for people that aren't the owner of a project saying that it is end of life or not. I just like, I guess I just don't know technically how it would be feasible to do
Same.
without tons of complexity, and that's the biggest thing here. Um, but I would also like Salve to comment about the I don't know, the unambiguous, like the speculative nature, like saying, you know, saying the project is EOL or some sort of event that's like speculative, like based on metadata about the project, like commit activity or something like that. But anyways, Salve.
Yeah, awesome. I'm really in for having this covered somehow, somewhere, and this I think is a really good spec to have that kind of phenomenon covered somehow. I've thought a little bit about this, and in my notes, the notes I've been taking for the CycloneDX sustainability sustainability working group that we just finished a few minutes ago. In those notes, I found out that the meaningful question to have. Sorry for stumbling in this. The claimant, there's somebody who claims something about a project. If it's a project owner claiming something, then that's fine. We should accept it as fact. They get to decide. But the situation that we're struggling with arises when the owner or the main maintainer or the author isn't available for some reason. So usually, at least in this on the CPAN, where I have my background, the Perl ecosystem, there are downstream indicators, like the people who manage the ecosystem might discover something and then try to reach out, say, for example, if there's a bug that needs to be fixed, or they know through rumors on the grapevine that somebody is currently out of commission for some reason or whatever. So they could, in a sense, make a claim that something has happened. And the question is, if it's a serious claim, like this is a dead project, literally because somebody has died, then it's good to know that who makes that claim. Now, if it turns out that the person wasn't dead anyway, it was highly somehow exaggerated, then having a more authoritative party counter that claim by saying, no, I'm not dead, I was just lost in a jungle or something like that, then that should be enough. But the point here is that it's useful information in either way. So having a claim about the situation of a project without having an idea of who claims it, I think they need to be together. And it doesn't need to be more than that. Just what is the status, who says it so, and if somebody else says something different, then who should we trust? And that's a useful conversation to have and make decisions on in any case.
So I like that a lot.
Like that.
Oh, go ahead, Steve.
Let me throw a completely different perspective. I don't think either one is necessarily, well, I think there's going to be trade-offs. Another entirely different perspective that you could theoretically go forward with is if you're keeping everything factual, and if you don't want to support like other people's claims, you could theoretically capture the events of like something the equivalent of CEO escalation or maintainer escalation, where you capture an event and it hasn't been responded to. You do the same event, it hasn't been responded to. You do the same event, it hasn't been responded to. And the policy engine, assuming you have something that you know consumes CLE, could say that, well, if I have 3 consecutive things where you know people have tried to reach out to this company or tried to reach out to this maintainer, this project's dead. This company's dead. So you're not actually putting that in the spec. You're putting the events, the factual events that not necessarily provide the evidence, but provide enough information for you to make a policy-based decision based on that data. Entirely different approach to what Salve just mentioned. I think both are valid and both probably should be explored. Now, we also need to figure out, what do we want for MVP?
Yes.
Very quickly, sorry. Having data points, like you just said, I think is a really good idea. that leads me to think about using like Bayesian inference or to try to compute a confidence level of a claim based on a bunch of input data and an prior assumption of what is from before you make the computation. That's a really good way of figuring out something in a situation where you don't have complete or correct information, or where you need to figure out as much as you can with the little information you have. And this is basically how spam detection works, like when they do analysis of text. So, but that's pretty much an advanced thing, and I think it would be super useful for some tooling to make use of information like that. So having that type of information available would make it possible to do something like that. But still, the situation where you have an authoritative source needs to have also a space to be put there. And if the authoritative source isn't available, have somebody who is next in line, or an informed second party, or a community manager, or something like that, can make it also work. But the question is this useful? Can it help people? And yes, we need information for it to be useful.
I personally think that use case would be like a smaller number of cases than the majority of people. Like, I think it's kind of somewhat of an edge case where someone has a project maybe and dies, and you know, you need to make a claim about it. It does happen, certainly, but whether we want it as MVP, I don't know. I did have one question for Steve, actually, in relation to CycloneDX and like how you prove a claim about a thing. If someone has a GitHub project, and in their GitHub releases they have a CycloneDX alongside their release, and you consume that, is there any way to verify that that's a CycloneDX that is associated with the package that's in that repo?
I believe you can. It would require SigStore, I believe. To probably do that. You need some kind of transparency log, I believe, to correlate, you know, the GitHub action, for example, that ran, and the release that actually transpired.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah,
that makes sense. Because I think, like, at least for me, for like an MVP, I would love to keep it as simple as possible, and like just have, you know, CLE wherever it's consumed from. Maybe someone uploads it alongside their GitHub release, or maybe you consume it from a T repository or something like that, and you assume trust basically from the sources that you pull it from for now.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I was thinking, but let me know
whether this is V1 or V2 or whatever. That's a separate, I think, discussion.
Okay.
But I like the concept of claims.
Mm-hmm.
In order to make a claim, you have to have an identity.
Mm-hmm.
You can vouch for a claim by adding your identity to it. That sounds good. I think it's important that the spec dictate, like the policy thing you're talking about, Steve. People are going to make whatever policies they want, regardless of what the spec says. But I think it's important that the sort of default and norm that we establish is that claims made by the maintainers are always override claims made by anyone else. And then separately, if we wanted to account for the hopefully also rare scenario where the maintainer is effectively claiming something that isn't true, like they claim they support something but aren't actually supporting it, then we should build something like that into the specification, because the most common case is going to be that somebody essentially brigades a maintainer by, like you said, if you three events and then you don't get a response, well, I could do 3 events in a half second, right? Like, so it has to be over a time frame. But but similarly, if you weight it based on the number of identities that are attached to a claim, then making sock puppet accounts is also free an instant. So like these are the sorts of things we'll have to think about. So like,
Yep.
this complexity may be a sufficient reason on its own to punt claims to a later like stage or whatever. But either way, we it's useful to know that it's coming as we design a schema.
So one
Go
thing we
ahead.
might be able to take inspiration from, and I haven't looked at it in a while, maybe 2 years or so, year and a half. But one thing we might be able to take inspiration from is the CVE 5.0 JSON spec. And in that spec, you know, we use that for the National Vulnerability Database. Now, the NVD, the CVE program, basically, one of the CNAs basically feed data to the CVE program. And then that data is basically enriched. And they basically have, I believe they're called ADPs, additional data providers. And they have a part of their schema where the ADP data resides. And it could actually conflict with other data that's in there, right? You can have multiple ADPs with literally different data, both describing the same thing, like the severity of a vulnerability, for example, could be different across multiple ADPs. So like, if you think about what we need to do for like claims, well, one person could claim that this project's dead. Another project could just claim that, oh, this person's on an extended vacation.
Like severity is a very subjective determination, but like versions affected is something that might not be the same across ADPs for a CVE, but I would expect that they don't conflict.
Right.
Right. Like one might say these versions are affected and another might say actually these versions are affected, but that's just subset, superset. Like, so in the similar fashion is there's going to be some things that are okay to be different, but shouldn't conflict. There's going to be some things that might be conceivable to conflict, and there's going to be some things that should be identical. Like, for example, if we, assuming we have a Perl in there somewhere, the Perl has to be identical for it to apply or something like that, right? So I think it's a good idea to look at prior art like CVE ADPs, and maybe that's a schema we follow. But CVEs are an imperfect enough ecosystem that we shouldn't constrain ourselves to that. But
no, I was thinking about, you know, in terms of looking at the CVE spec as a potential path forward without actually doing the work for the MVP. So, you know, as a possible design pattern, we can design for now and then do the work in the future is kind of what I was thinking.
Yeah, that's fair.
Okay, that's a good point.
So, stupid question. Does a simple commit to a repository count as an event? Because what I'm thinking about is the example of the repo that hasn't had a release for 5 years. But if there's been a commit, even if it's just to say, you know, as of January 2025, this is still a valid project, is that actually an event?
No, so these events would be like in the CLE schema, like in the JSON, and then it would be an event that says this version of this product is end of life at this date, basically. And that would be an example of like one event.
Well, and I would expand on that and say a commit could be an event, but isn't always an event. If you're in an ecosystem where consumption is not from the repo, NPM, let's say, a commit is nothing unless there's a release. But if you're in an ecosystem where consumption is from the repo, like Go, then perhaps a commit is an event, because every commit is kind of a release, right? Depending on how it's set up. Similarly speaking, if you commit to like fix a typo, that doesn't mean anything. But if you commit to include explicit mention of support status, that definitely could precipitate an event. And like, so it's more like the event would list the commit as evidence for it, as opposed to the commit itself as the event.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, every commit to a Go repo could be an event. a published
Right.
event or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know enough about Go other than that they install directly from repos, but like, you know,
Right.
I would assume that that's the case because there's no way to prevent you from installing any random SHA.
They do tagging, and you can also just like install from any SHA.
Right.
So you
I
can
think
do both.
PHP does that too. You basically a tag in PHP, whatever, is that PHP Composer, I think. A tag is basically a release, I believe.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Same as
Yeah,
Go.
I mean, and npm you can install from Git repos as well from any SHA or from a tag, but like I'm more arguing based on what the idiomatic expectation is. And so if in Go the idiomatic expectation is to install from a tagged release, then a commit wouldn't necessarily be an event, but a tag would be.
Yeah.
Right.
So just to sum up, we kind of discussed claims. Are we all in agreement that claims is not something that we should try and implement for MVP, but it's something that we should keep in mind, and maybe kind of think a little bit or design some sort of design something around it, but not actually implement it in the spec?
That's one for me.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Cool. Okay. Let it be resolved. Okay, so moving on to the second major point, integration with existing systems and actually, before we move on, anything else in here that we didn't cover that should be included in here under balance, structure, and flexibility? The main point here, I guess, was just around understanding that like life cycle events are, it's kind of a complex space. So it needs to be flexible enough to handle different use cases, but anyways. Okay, moving on. Point 2, integration with existing systems and practices. So we've talked about this before, the integration with existing standards and tools that exist. And so I said, we must consider and define integration points with existing standards. Perl for component identification, CycloneDX and SPDX for SBOMs, and T for data exchange and component aliasing. Anyone?
You don't necessarily need to put it in the document, but I just want to like npm lock files are also conceptually SBOMs, and so we want to make sure that it can work with those formats as well. Conceptually, they may or may not match some specific schema, but they provide all the information an SBOM needs.
Interesting.
So that's true and not true, Jordan, depending on packaging. But yeah, I actually want to pull back from that actually, because it says must consider and define integration points. I don't think this group should define how CycloneDX or define how SPDX is going to support CLE. That's up to those specifications to define, even if they want to support CLE. I think we should, I don't know what the right word is, but I think we should provide a way for them to do that. But it's not our role to define this for NPM or CycloneDX or SPDX.
Maybe propose an integration point, and then like, because that's within our control, but their acceptance of it, or you know, and the design of it is not.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
That's a really good point.
Yep. The only thing I guess is potentially Perl. We can support Perl in the CLE, so that would make sense. And then I'll move this to another line and add some different
and
wording.
then T, I think we're fine because, I mean, it's just another task group. So
yeah,
I think that's fine.
Okay. Yeah. Anyone need me to explain while we're here, basically kind of how we're thinking about integration points or anything like that between all of these?
So do you want to tweak the wording a bit? based on what Steve just said?
Yeah, I'm gonna do this after. I'm writing notes right now.
Cool.
I'm gonna modify this PR in here and probably with some feedback from Jordan as well. But I'm writing notes here. Yes, I will tweak this, but do we need to support anything other than Perl for usage and identification in the MVP release of CLE?
I'll tell you what I did for Cyclone,
Mm-hmm.
and you can tell me or not whether or not you guys want to do it the same way or differently.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
1.0 of CycloneDX, we supported GAVs, so group artifact version. But that's commonly used in Maven. But it can be applicable to anything without a package manager as well, right? What is a namespace? What is the name? What is the version? 1.0 also supported Perl, and it supported CPE. So we supported basically 3 different competing approaches to component identity.
Mm-hmm.
In the future, I would love for us to be able to do just 1 or 2, but the reality is that CycloneDX is even extended component identity beyond just those 3. We support Omnivore artifact IDs. We support software heritage IDs, and for hardware support, we support GMNs, GTINs, etc. So if IoT and that sort of thing is going to be in scope, you're going to have to support a lot more than just Perl, which is something we're doing in T, by the way. So what we're doing in T, just so you know, is and we've talked to some folks at Cisco and some other places about this. The holy grail is to be able to imagine I don't know, a router in your home, right? For Wi-Fi or internet. You put the UPC label, write down the UPC label into your browser, whatever. You get all the product information about that thing, including all of its life cycle, including all the vulnerabilities and everything else, the SBOM, etc. So that's essentially what we're trying to get to.
Nice.
Actually, wouldn't most people want to just like point their phone as a Q code on the router?
Yes, we talked with. We did talk with. It wasn't GS1 directly. However, it was one of the very, very well knowledgeable people in obviously hardware identification. And they are moving a lot of the GS1 standards to use QR codes in the future. So in the future, you may not necessarily have a UPC label like you have today. You'll actually have a QR code. And that is going to link you to a website with all the relevant product information on it. And it supports extensions. So as a vendor, you can provide additional data other than just what the specification provides. So long-winded answer, I think Perl is a hard requirement for software. I wouldn't confine yourself to just Perl.
Okay.
Yeah, so we could see V1 as being like type Perl value, whatever, but that's the only type we currently support, and that way we can be expanded in the future. But something like that. Cool.
Should I, when I'm writing these constraints, I've just been writing them under the assumption that this is the stuff that we're going to do for MVP, for like V1. Is that right? Or should I? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that stuff for not like for future versions should be in here, but like noted as such.
Okay. Okay.
Just because that way
Yeah.
we keep it in our mind as we're designing things.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, you might add a must consider for Perl, and then either a must for must support, you know, other identifiers in the future,
Yeah,
or may support other identifiers. And that way we design for these things in mind.
exactly.
Yep. Okay. Perfect.
Yeah, that also means that if tools do the thing they usually do and willfully deviate whenever they feel like it, that we've created a sort of walled garden for them to deviate within that's easy to adapt to. If you don't give people those sorts of potential guardrails, then you typically are forced to upstream what they do instead of being able to evolve it.
Yeah. Okay. The next point should be straightforward to implement incrementally within the tools and systems that the organization already use. Adoption should not be an all or nothing affair. Yeah, I don't know. Kind of self-explanatory here. The third point, anyone else have any questions or comments on point number 2 before we move on? From Salve or Mark?
No, I'm good.
Okay,
Fine.
perfect. Then point 3 is about handling the identifier aliasing. And this is just when products have events like they're sold to another manufacturer and their identifier changes to the new manufacturer's identifier, we need to be able to track that we need to track that new identifier back to the source of supply chain information like the CLE or vulnerability data. It can be extended to even, but identifiers may be different from that which exists in sources of supply chain intelligence. Okay, so the CLE must provide a formal way to capture surface events that could result in identifier changes and provide a way to surface the new identifiers. I don't know why I put surface here. It should just be events. But we need a way to say that when a manufacturer acquires something, they can say, this is the new identifier for my piece of software. And we should have it aliased back. So we've talked about that being in T, for example, some sort of aliasing within T, but this doesn't really define how we should be doing the aliasing, just that it's a critical part of being in the CLE. It's a critical part of the CLE. So we need to be thinking about aliasing.
I think it fits well into the claims concept we were just discussing as well, because my comment on the PR is that there's a potential attack vector here where I can be like, good package is actually renamed now to bad package. And then right. But if you, with the claims thing, you can specify it such that everyone automatically, like by default, discounts a claim from someone that's not the maintainer, you know, and then the maintainer can easily override it. Right. So there's probably a way we can design all of those things to account for each other.
And even if it's not malicious, there is potentially identifier overlap that could happen, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, could accidentally name the package the same thing, but
another like related issue could be, well, yeah. So for things where the package source isn't immutable, like Go and GitHub, if I delete my username and then someone makes that username and then creates a repo, that's not the same project. But like there has to be a way to talk about that, even though it's got the exact same URL. But then similarly speaking, for people are going to want to say, well, this project's dead, but here can I point to these 3 alternatives? And even though they're not actually a rename of that one project, that's like where people should look. And maybe that's out of scope for this specification, but people are going to want to do it. So something to think about.
Yes. Yeah.
And we wouldn't want our aliasing design to be abused for pointing to alternatives, which might be a reason to provide for alternatives in the spec. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Salve mentioned that one before. I think
Okay.
actually that there is, if I can pull up the spec, I think we had an event. Let me see if I can find it. Oh no. Superseded. Oh no, sorry. This is at a version level. So we have a superseded by at the version level, an event defined. But we don't have it necessarily specified at the component level. Like this component, we like some sort of, it's not in the superseded by, but like alternatives. Now that this is completely end of life.
Right.
So, yeah.
Doesn't even have to be end of life. It could be just a fork.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
that's
that's sort
happening
of
in the
that's
AI
a
model
tricky one.
space right now.
Yeah. But like that's a tricky one because
Yeah.
there are some of my projects where I would be happy to list forks as alternatives. And there are some of my projects where screw that guy, like they're just trying to steal my downloads. You know what I mean? Like, and so it's that has to be thought of somehow as well, right? Like if it's a welcome signpost or an unwelcome signpost.
Oh, this is gonna be a can of worms.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. It is going to be can of worms for sure. I'd like to not include it in the MVP.
The aliasing part?
No, sorry,
Yeah.
the kind of superseded by or the
right.
Yeah.
I mean, we're going to need to be aggressive about what we include or punt for sure. But it's going to be challenging because this stuff is all, intertwined.
Yeah.
Right. If we handle aliasing in MVP and not alternatives, or, then like people are likely to abuse aliasing to provide alternatives. And maybe that's an acceptable like trade-off for shipping something sooner. But like, it's just something we're going to have to work through.
So one thing that we should, I think one thing that we should probably call out specifically that we will not do is provide aliasing for, I'm going to use the case of like the NVD as an example, where, the NVD data is garbage. You've got, you may have one open source project and it's known by 10 different names. So you've got 10 different types of CPEs in the NVD for a single project. And there's thousands of these types of data issues in the NVD. I don't want CLE to be misused for this particular case. I don't want this to become what essentially is the SPDX external references, which are not identifiers, right? I'm talking about SPDX 2.x, not 3. They've fixed a lot of stuff in 3. But in SPDX 2, external references were not identifiers. They were believed to be relevant. So what people would do is they would stuff a bunch of CPEs in there and hope to get a match just because the NVD data is so bad. So I don't want CLE to go down the same road. I don't want it to be misused or solving another person's data problems.
Well, that's a really good point, because it is interesting as a manufacturer, right? If you're producing a CLE for your product and you have a Perl, and you don't necessarily know all the Perls that could exist downstream when the consumers are running your product and running SIFT on it, for example, right? They might be getting like a Perl that's like type binary / Redis. They might be getting a Perl that's like npm / Redis. And so how do you ahead of time necessarily know all the Perls that will be generated downstream, or get feedback or get information back to you in some way that these Perls are existing downstream? That's very interesting.
I think
You
it
know what I'm
all
saying?
comes down to, yeah, I think it all comes down to how we label the fields and how and what the descriptions that we actually write in there. Because words matter, and that's one of the reasons why the SPDX 2.x stuff just got abused so badly.
Yeah, in my experience, it's the ideal is when the specification forbids misuse, and when that's not possible, then clearly describing the semantic intent.
Right.
If you don't do that, then people will point to the lack of it as justification for whatever they're doing. If you do that, then they at least know that they should feel bad and ashamed, and won't try to defend themselves when they're called out. And that's that's a decent fallback position if for misuse.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. So must ensure that alias information is captured in a structured machine way. So we need tools to be able to consume this information. Should not allow informal or ad hoc approaches to aliasing that undermine tooling and interoperability. And the specification should only support Perl initially. And then I'll add a comment here about supporting other identifiers in the future. And I added this comment actually.
Yeah, I think that's fine the way it is, actually.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's fine. I mean, you're basically saying that we are going to support more, but Perl for starters. I think that's fine.
Initially, I think is even doing sufficient work there. That's fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me write this. Okay. Okay, and then so that's point 3. The exact mechanism for how we're going to support aliasing is not defined, just that it should exist in some way. And then last point, number 4, scoping the specification. So the ceiling needs to grow over time to support more components, more life cycle events, more complex releases, or release like hardware, for example, hardware types and things like that. But the first version should focus on the most common scenarios. So prioritize modeling lifecycle events that have the greatest impact on operational and security risk. So to start with, which I think we've been pretty focused on that so far, which is good.
Yeah.
Should prioritize software while thinking about compatibility with hardware life cycles when defining the specification. And must design the specification iteratively. The first implementation shouldn't be a toy. It should be like you can pick it up and use it. Should be grounded in reality. The specification should work with what practitioners see in the real world, not what we wish the software supply chain looked like.
So it's going to be messy. That's what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah, like this aliasing, this is stuff that we're thinking about aliasing, where you have this SBOM providers and they can generate, and all types of Perls. That's messy. But that's what happens in the real world. So yeah.
When do we want this? Okay, so this is I apologize. This is the first time I've seen this document, so I still have a few hundred GitHub notifications that I haven't had a chance to look at yet. So this is my first read. So thank you for going through it.
Yeah.
when do you guys want to merge this in? You have a time frame for this?
Well, so I mean, I think we kind of went over everything today. And depending on how we feel today, like I'll make some changes and ask for another review. And then hopefully, I was hoping, my time at least was hopefully by next meeting, we could kind of just go over the changes I made. And, you know, like say whether we feel comfortable merging it or not, merge it in. And then I would also like to write the technical choices PR as well by next meeting.
Can
At the
we
same
think we
maybe
should merge this
assign this
PR
homework?
within a week.
Yeah,
I think we
okay.
can just iterate on it after it's merged.
Okay. Okay, sure.
Yeah.
So like
I
we
think- I think you should-
give everyone here, you know, a week to add further comments and read it over, and then we just land it.
Okay.
And yeah.
Okay.
I like that. I like that.
Okay.
Should you give us homework for the next one so we can actually pre-read before we come to the meeting?
Yes. Yes. I can once I'm done with this, the technical choices, I will ping everyone as well. Because
Okay.
I don't think I pinged anyone in the channel. So I will ping you with a link to the PR as homework to read ahead of the meeting.
Okay.
I think that's my plan at least. And then yeah, this is the plan basically. Just keep chugging away on these 3 points.
Okay. There was a comment on 2119, which I'm all in favor of. As Jordan probably knows, with TC39, when it comes to the Ecma docs, we need to do a few changes. However, mostly around capitalization and how it's actually presented in the documentation itself. However, I'm a big fan of the RFC language. We will.
I commented on the PR already, referencing Salve's comment that we should link to that and say that's how we mean the terms.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's great.
There is a I believe there is a section of the CLE draft documentation that specifically talks about the RFC language. So as a group, we should probably look at that and see if that's the language we want to keep or if we need to change it. I believe, let me see if I can pull it up real quick. Ecma TC54. And it was one of the XXX ones, I think. Let's see. CLE right here. And it's the. Okay. So I'm going to paste the link in the chat.
This one?
I get to my thing here. What's that? Yeah, but it's actually the online documentation, which is there.
Oh, I see. Yep.
Yeah. So, do I have that in here? No, I don't actually. There's a section in Ecma 424, and maybe you guys have it in, I don't know if you guys have it in 39, but there's a section in 424 where we have language on oh, here we go. Why don't you look at the Perl one actually? If you look at the Perl one, I just put that link in the chat. There's a section on conformance, and section 2.1 is what we have for Perl currently.
Yeah.
And I would highly advise going through that language and seeing if that's what we want to adopt or not.
Okay. Okay. Sounds good. That's some homework for everyone then. I'll paste the actual RFC as well here. 2119, right?
Yeah, I commented on the PR.
Okay, great.
Link.
Yeah. We can decide at the next meeting then.
I know
Perfect.
I
Great call
know
today.
BCPs don't change for a long time, but man, that with the issue date of March 97, that has been around for a while.
Indeed.
I remember having a big argument with some of our development teams about 8-9 years ago, when they were coming up with a whole pile of like requirements, terminology, and I actually said to them, "Why are you not using this? Why are you actually diverging from this? Somebody's already written this for you. Just use it."
Yeah.
No, they've got to do it their own way.
I'll use it if it exists.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
All
All right.
Well, thanks all. I'll put the recording up on YouTube later today.
Yep. Next meeting is February 6th.
Awesome.
See you then.
All right.
All right. Cheers.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.